This will probably be a one-off type video, but maybe if it does well, I'll try this with a few other setups. But today we will be taking a look at some slightly older magic armor, that being Elite Tectonic, and seeing how it stacks up in the current meta. And getting right into things, I went ahead and did a stream testing this, just picking a couple of bosses that I would do normally and seeing how it compared to a few other places. But before I was able to do that, I actually had to go and perk up my Elite Tech. Now this Barrow set used to hold a bunch of Slayer perks back when I used to do a bunch of Elite Dungeon farming and other sorts of things that required different Slayer perks. The Slayer perks being like Undead Slayer, Dragon Slayer, Genocidal, things like this. And I used to dye armor sets depending on what perks they had on them. With Legendary armor, we still can't do this with like the Vestments and the Tumikins, and still Elite Dracolich, even though that's not Legendary armor, but I digress. But I went ahead and just reperked it with kind of standard perks that I think anyone looking into this armor set would have. Here on the top, I have C4R5, Impatient 4, Mobile, and then on the bottom, I just have Biting 4. Now, I did have ultimatums for Energizing 2, but I wasn't able to really spam out and try and get a second one of those. So for the purposes of testing, what I did is took it off of my Tumikins armor, slapped it on the Elite Tech, did my testing, and now that I've done the testing, I went ahead and pulled it back off this armor set because I don't really plan on using it. I have best in slot, but I don't think people in this bracket or part of the upgrade process are going to go for things like Precise 6 Ultimatums 4 on their staff. Maybe historic components have come down a decent amount by now. I'm sure they got farmed into the ground from people just AFKing the low level areas, but still it seems like a pretty annoying perk to go for. And say it's someone who is maybe returning to this game and still has Elite Tech, they're probably going to be on this setup that I still have on my staff. This is the old best in slot setup of Precise 6 Ruthless 1, Aftershock 4 Eruptive 2. When I'm talking about older stuff like this, I might end up using the older terminology like Equilibrium back when Eruptive, for those who don't know, Eruptive used to be called Equilibrium, but then they changed the name. This is in March 2024 they did this change. And yes, I have been playing this game quite a long time, so if I interchange the two, just know that I'm talking about the Eruptive perk, not the new Equilibrium perk. But anyways, I digress. And so I just kept my perks the same as usual. It's still the old setup here of Precise 6 Aftershock 1, Aftershock 4 Eruptive 2. And for the rest of the gear, this is actually kind of a breath of fresh air, I won't lie. Being able to use items like Blast Diffusion Boots, I haven't really been able to play with these so far, and they did get changed with the recent combat modernization or EoC 2.0, whatever the heck we want to call that update. Some would call it destruction of combat, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to go into that in this video. But when you cast Wild Magic, you get a plus 8% base damage on your basic magic abilities. And with how my rotations work out right now, I kind of go through this cycle of hitting Wild Magic, then a G-Conk into an Ember Staff EOF. And so these Blast Boots actually plugged in really nicely to just my general rotations that I use already. And with Asphyxiate basically having a baked-in Tumikins type effect into it by default now, it honestly wasn't that bad to use, and I didn't really have to adapt my rotations a whole lot. What I ended up doing is just foregoing the second Asphyx, and I would channel the first Affix completely to get the buff. And since it only lasted 3.6 seconds, I would let the Asphyx finish and immediately go for a Runic Charge with a greater concentrated blast into an Omni Power, which it is only 15% critical strike damage increase, but it is still worthwhile to go for. And in the glove slot, it was kind of nice, again, being that Elite Tech is only a 3 armor piece set. Just being able to choose whichever gloves I wanted based off of whether a target was poisonable or not was kind of nice. It was kind of a breath of fresh air. And I was just using either the wrist wraps or I was using the Cinder Banes. I wasn't really focusing on the wrist wrap effect too much. much, but if it is something you want to optimize for, it definitely is there to do so. And then the rest of the gear was pretty simple. You still want a bunch of crit chance, so I have Grim, I have a Reaver's Ring. In my EOFs, I have the Ember Staff, and I have a G Staff just in case I need accuracy somewhere. I believe the only place I did need accuracy was at Sanctum of Rebirth, because I believe I was on the Prayer set. In fact, I think for all of my testing, I was actually on prayers instead of the curses that I have here right now. And that is because I wanted to just go full in and give this armor set the best chance possible at the bosses that I wanted to test it. And the specific bosses I ended up testing it at, I did 3 of them. I tested this at Raksha because it is a tried and true boss and I use it just for a lot of benchmarking. I tested this at Sanctum of Rebirth just to kind of throw a newer boss at this armor set, even though I was definitely using Elite Tech there on release, but it's still a new-ish boss. And just like with most things on this channel, all roads lead to the almighty Art Glacier, and that is the last boss that I ended up testing at, because for some reason I just keep finding myself going back there. But I will go ahead and just talk through my overall thoughts on the 3 bosses that I tested at Raksha. I was pretty surprised. I believe I ended up getting some pretty decent pool skips right off the bat. I tested this a little while ago, at least compared to the time of recording, and I believe what I was doing is just kind of doing standard magic stuff of stalling a wand spec, releasing with smoke cloud, and going for a sunshine rotation. I think one of the kills I did, I got pretty close to not getting the pool skip, but every single time I did manage to get said pool skip, and I think the fastest one I saw was around the 37 to 39 second mark, which is definitely nothing to shake a stick at. That is a very respectable pool skip, even for modern standards. Yes, I understand that Melee can do it in like 20 seconds with a giant pre-build. We're keeping this within the realm of who I actually expect to go farming Raksha, not what the top nth percentile can do. But yeah, I really did notice the 6% crit chance on the armor set. It was kind of refreshing. Yes, Tumikins has higher inside of Sunshine, but having that stack with normal prayers, you kind of reach that threshold where crits are pretty much going to happen quite a lot. But it was kind of nice going back to Raksha with Elite Tech. The 6% crit chance is definitely nice here. It works out well for giving you all of the adrenaline you ever need and stacking with the prayers overhead. The Eclipse Soul Prayer giving you 4% crit chance. It worked out pretty nicely. Also, the Blast Diffusion boots seem to be doing a bit more work than I thought they were, because G-Conk is, I believe, still your strongest basic ability, so having a boot that boosts the damage on it after pressing Wild Magic, which you're going to be pressing quite a bit inside of these rotations, it honestly was a nice and welcomed buff. Now, I will say I'm still not pressing Smoke Tendrils inside of my Sunshines, and I was able to get perfectly fine kills at most places, but I believe if you're not on like the complete best in slot setup, which Elite Tech would fall into this category, I think pressing Smoke Tendrils is worthwhile. I'm still just annoyed at the ability feeling like absolute dog water to press. It feels completely limp. There is nothing going on there, and so out of principle I've just stopped pressing the button entirely. Maybe in rotations I'll work it back in, but it feels like kind of old 4-hit Isfix where it just did not feel that good to let it channel. But I did need to mention it in case some of you were wondering, and I'm sure you could go find a damage calc or something like that, or I'm sure some spreadsheet wizard will talk about it being worth over something else. But yeah, I was not really pressing tendrils all too often, and I believe the fastest time I saw at Raksha was like a 125 or a 127, which is honestly pretty close to what I was seeing with Tumikins, and it's mostly because this is one of those bosses where you can really focus on bursting damage, and Tumikins having the extra 1.5% crit chance and the biggest fix isn't going to make that much of a difference because of how Raksha works and its phasing and how like the HP pools kind of play into things, and being that you're very close to that 1 minute mark mark already, being at, you know, the 120 to 130 second mark, Magic is pretty much running into Sunshine cooldown issues rather than it is long-term damage output issues. And it honestly might be one of the best places for someone with Elite Tech to go and farm out, assuming Greater Ricochet and Greater Chain haven't been fully farmed into the ground. This would definitely be a good boss to farm out for some GP with this setup. By the way, in the description below, I'll probably leave some links to some highlights of the fastest kill I did of each boss, so that way if you want to go in there and pull a rotation out, feel free. There will be links in the video description. Now the next boss, or technically dungeon, that I moved on to was Sanctum of Rebirth, and honestly I was surprised, although I probably shouldn't have been surprised at how well Magic worked, at least on the first two bosses. I think on the first boss I was at like a 130 or even in the 120s again, so I'm kind of in that Goldilocks zone where you're more likely running into Sunshine cooldown issues than you are actual damage per Sunshine issues, at least when comparing Elite Tech to something like Tumikin's armor. And at Vermex it felt perfectly fine. I didn't really have any issues. When I was on Prayers, obviously getting all the crit chance was really nice, and it felt like just a straightforward Magic setup. I remember doing it like this on release, although not quite these rotations because we didn't have the whole EoC 2.0 thing going on. But yeah, no notes really on Vermex other than that. It felt perfectly fine, and that same feeling carried over decently well into Kezalam. In fact, I believe on Kezalam I was either close to getting the master time or I did get the master time. Both on Vermex and Kezalam, I think if you did a purposeful setup for both of these bosses, you could get this setup to get the master time requirements. However, I don't think going for master timers is going to be the real focus of someone at this gear level, but it is something there for the few people that do want to go for it. And like I said before, at Kezalam it felt really good. The damage was there. I did notice a little bit, I'm not sure if they reworked Asphyxiate on its stun timings or whatnot between Tumikin's and Elite Tech, but I did feel like not really focusing on the second Asphyxiate as much was hurting things a bit when it came to Kezalam specifically, because when I'm running through here with Magic on a full best in slot setup, I really am using both Asphyxiates intentionally, not only just for their damage, but for the fact that it will stun Kezalam even more and prevent special attacks from happening, because it is not a stun immune boss. And in fact, if Kezalam is giving you issues, it usually is because you're not stunning him enough, or say even bringing Dread Nips or something like that. And other than the second Asphyx and Sunshine not really being worthwhile, I was still able to get through and get a solid Kezalam kill. And for the final boss, the meat and potatoes of this dungeon, we move on to Nakatra. And this is the boss where I noticed the difference the most between using Tumikin's and using Elite Tech, because the HP pools are large enough to where the extra Asphyxiate and each Asphyxiate doing quite a bit more damage, thus giving you also the double number of hits, so you have double the chances of critting, so your FSOA is going to work more, so on and so forth. This is where I have noticed the most difference. I believe my PR for Magic Camp with Tumikin's here is like a 230 something, I want to say. I haven't really tried to nail down a hyper fast Magic Camp kill, but I believe when I ran through here with Elite Tech, it was like right at the 3-minute mark. And the biggest difference, not only from doing damage on Nakatra, but having an Asphyxiate for the dogs that works well, I did notice that a lot more and felt it there a lot more. But I still think with proper planning and doing some good rotations and getting a little bit of RNG on your side, you could still get the master timer quite comfortably with this setup. The only basis of comparison I have is, again, my own gameplay. I'm not really going to compare it to anything else other than that, but this is where I did notice the big damage difference between Tumikin's armor and Elite Tech armor. I still set up the same way, I still did things the same way as I always have with this dungeon, and it kind of felt like I was living back in like 2024, 2025 when this boss released. Actually, I don't don't think this boss released in 2024. Maybe I'm misremembering the dates there. Anyways, when this boss came out, I did a lot of magic camp here, and it kind of reminded me of sitting here doing kills and farming the pet, which was nice for a nostalgic reason. But if you're someone wanting to do Sanctum of Rebirth and this is the gear setup you have, you absolutely can send this dungeon into oblivion, no questions asked. And like I said before in this video, all roads go back to Glaikor. Now I ended up sending 2 separate Glaikor kills, both at the Silver Iceborne Enrage, which is 2000%. And the first one, I kept the prayers on and just tried to see if I could survive, more so testing the defensive capabilities of this armor set to see if the armor difference between, you know, legendary and elite armor is noticeable. Even though they're both damage armors, they're power armors, they're not meant to be defensive armors, there is still an armor rating. And using something like Eclipse Salt, like most people, if they are doing Glaikor, which I don't think most people are doing Glaikor in Big 26, but for the few that are, most of them are not sending the prayers up at 2000%. But I did want to stress test it and see if I could find any, you know, cracks in the armor, so to speak. And I was able to survive. I was able to get a kill, which kind of surprised me more than anything. I did have to eat a little bit of food, but I was definitely limiting myself, having to use things like Debilitate and Reflect and going for reses instead of Divert to get more adrenaline for more damage. And it did reflect in the kill time, but I went ahead and went back with a curses setup and just brought out, you know, the Soul Split, the tier 99 prayer, and I just went through and absolutely cruised through a 2k kill, no problem. If you want to run a big Glaikor streak or even try and send it for the full 200 KS, Elite Tech will absolutely be able to do it for you, no questions asked, assuming you have a good comfortability and understanding of Glaikor. That is, you still have to go through and execute, you know, a rotation and understand the ebb and flow of the boss and all of that good stuff, but the Elite Tech will not be a prohibitive factor, so to speak, for that achievement, at least if that is your goal, to use power armor on said achievement. A lot of people I think are going through still with like some sort of tank armor to take advantage of Animate Dead, but if you don't want to chicken out and do the tank armor route and you just rather Giga Chad with power armor instead, Elite Tech can definitely get the job done. Now I did go ahead and check back on the ancient kill, and it was a 259.4, so it is a sub 3 for a 2k enrage. And for me, it just felt like another day, another dollar running through this boss. The Elite Tech, again, the damage is noticeable on these longer fights with larger HP pools because of Asphyxiate, and the extra critical strike damage lasting for 9 seconds instead of 3.6. But the one thing that was helping Elite Tech is I didn't feel as bad bringing Cinderbanes because Elite Tech's only a 3-piece set, so that was kind of nice. And a sub 3 kill at 2k is definitely solid for a style camp. I think my usual hybrid kills at this point are like in the low 2s. Maybe I'm still getting sub 2s at this point, but it really depends on special attack order and a lot of other factors. But I think at these enrages, I'm still in the 220s or so for hybrids, so to see a good Elite Tech kill sitting right at sub 3, and if I remember correctly on this kill, I did get really good spec orders. I played it really well. It's kind of a best case scenario, you're not going to see that all the time type of kill, but to see it doing that well, I think it brings us to something that we all need to take a step back and remember from time to time about this game, and honestly many other things in life, but we'll just keep it to RuneScape. And that is, just because a new shiny thing came out and is better than the old does not mean that the old stuff went and got nerfed. Old methods will still work the same way so long as, you know, combat isn't fundamentally changed or something like that. You can still run through and improv out an Elite Tech rotation just fine and do very, very well. And for what the cost of Elite Tech is, it is definitely a recommend until you can save for Tumikins. Now, the thing I'm not exactly sure on, and something that I might have to test later on, this could be another one of those experimental supplemental videos is to see if for what the cost of buying Tumikin's armor, if I threw that into a second combat style, like buying some melee gear and doing a hybrid setup, if that hybrid setup would be better. If you'd like to see a video exploring that as an idea, leave it in the comments below. But that's all I really have to say about that.